Listen up, you fools! We got a new ban list this week. We got a new core set this week. There's been a lot of stuff shaking up the metagame, so here is, in my opinion, just early format, top 5 decks of the metagame. We will see how this shakes out. We probably won't have a great idea until after Nationals this weekend for some of the smaller European countries, I believe. And then also like the YCS for the US that we have next weekend. Then we'll have a good idea of where the format is going after that. But here's an early estimate for if you are a rogue player, a meta player, whatever, a competitive player nonetheless, to have a scope of what to kind of expect going forward. So let's get into this thing. This is just my opinion, of course, but you know, let me know your thoughts down below. Okay, number 1 is Fluondress. I think this deck is solid, but I don't think its engine is just downright as strong as the other decks on this list. So I think it fits into this very specific realm, kind of like True Draco a couple of years ago, where because it doesn't special summon, because it doesn't use the extra deck, it's a weird deck that can kind of dodge a lot of main deck staples that a lot of decks have. So you have a good matchup in a lot of given instances because nobody wants to hards like main deck for you because they're expecting, you know, the other 4 best decks in the format that all kind of lose to more similar things than your deck. So I think it gets a good bump because of that, just kind of the particular way it plays, dodging other anti-hate cards for meta, and I think it kind of reaps the benefits of that. But yeah, still number 5, still solid. Maybe it's the best deck in tier 2, but still really solid. Next up we have Elvelich. Yeah, it's Elvelich. They're still really good. I know Rorodon got hit, so that's technically a hit to Elvelich, but not really. They're not doing the cyber stuff at least anymore with DPE. But this deck still does stuff. I mean, it's Elvelich. As long as they don't hit the core of what Elvelich is, it'll remain one of the best control decks in the game because it doesn't need the normal summon. All the cards are good to discard, so a ton of engines work with it. You know, and we've seen that over the years. So I think Elvelich remains really solid. Kind of in that same vein as Fluondress. I think they're very close to each other. Yeah, if I had to argue, maybe both of them wouldn't make tier 1. Maybe they'd both be like very good tier 2 decks, but it's hard to say right now. We're still so early in the format. Number 3, and the biggest spice on this list for sure, Therians. I don't know how this will manifest, but I do believe in this engine. I do believe in this deck. I think it'll be insane in some way, shape, or form. I don't know whether it's going to end up being Punk Therians, a more pure kind of variant that works with like a half-half deck with Punk Therian, or as just a small engine. We could see it manifest as Sun and Avalon come up out of nowhere. I think that'll be more of a high-end rogue deck, or maybe even a tier 2. Same thing with Earth Machine. Obviously a splashable engine in there, and any other good plant and or machine archetype. But I'm mainly looking at that pure variant. I think it's so interesting. Maybe even ABCs. That's the other one that I think is worth mentioning, is kind of like that amalgamation deck that I believe Tombox was messing around with on his channel. It's like ABCs, Therians, obviously Brave Adventure, and I think there's one other engine in there if I'm not mistaken. But it's an insane amount of power cards, but my worry is that the deck does play a handful of bricks, so I don't know if it'll last like a long tournament overall, but I do think it's still a really scary pick and something you have to keep an eye out for. I do think this will manifest itself some way, somehow in the format, just not exactly sure how, so keep an eye on it. Number 2 is Sword Soul. We got the ban list. They saw literally 0 hits. In fact, they actually got Pot of Desires from 1 to 2. So that was already a playable deck or a playable card in the deck, but people would opt not to play because it's a 1-off. Like, you know what I mean? It's not bumping your consistency that much. But as a 2-off, I think most players will opt to play it if you're not playing, you know, any crazy things that, you know, really punish you by getting banished. But it's one of the few meta decks that don't play Adventure. So yeah, can abuse Desires really easily. But I respect this deck. I love that it doesn't feel broken, but it feels really solid. It's kind of like, reminds me of Salamangrate. When you looked at the deck, there was no one thing that the deck did that where you were like, that's broken. Oh my God. Like, we had Sky Strikers and you were like, Engage is broken. Straight up broken. The resource loop of Orcus was broken. Thunder Dragon's broken for obvious reasons. But Salamangers, you were like, they're not broken. They're just solid all around. That's kind of how this deck feels to me. It's obviously a more combo-oriented deck than Salamangrates, but still gives me that similar feel of just really good, not broke. So I like it. Number 2. And number 1, it's obvious. It's Despia. I like this deck. It's cool. I'm not a huge fusion guy myself, so I don't find myself particularly drawn to it, but I respect the deck for what it is. I think it's very good at One, being one of those decks that, yes, it's a very high meta contender, but two, it's also kind of good at playing against its anti-cards. Obviously, there's stuff like non-fusion area and dimension barrier. There's not a ton you can do against those cards in most instances, but as far as like hand traps and like generic meta staples, this deck really works around those cards really well, especially in the hands of a good pilot. So I do think that gives it the best chance to kind of be the best deck in the format going forward, is just because I think it inherently can kind of work around just the stuff like generic good stuff in the format, which I think the other decks kind of can struggle against a little bit more, but still, it's beatable. I like this format. It looks really open. Let me know your thoughts down below, though. These are my top 5 decks going into the next format. I would particularly try to build around these, but not disregard the top 3, but like definitely build around the top 3 mostly, but like don't disregard stuff like Elvelich and Fluondress, very particular decks that can kind of punish you for playing, for siding and maining too hard for the top 3 decks more so. And yeah, I would give you some, that would be my advice for this format. But all in all, it's a cool format. I like that it seems more wide open. I thought going into the format that it was going to be like Despia, very clearly the best deck, and everything else is falling behind. And it is the best deck in my opinion, but it's not by far and away run away with it. I think there's a lot of room for some other decks to definitely come up and compete. And that gets me kind of rowdy in the shorts. So yeah, I like it. Very cool. We have the Legendary Duel set coming up as well. Maybe we'll see some other rogue decks come up. Something surprising. Who knows? But yeah. That's it for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching, as always. Like I said, let me know your thoughts down below on the top 5 decks in the format. If you think there's anything else that should wiggle up into here, let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.